Okay, so this is where you all should bring out your paper and pen and take some notes, and we are about to go through our economic and risk analysis for the farms here in Moaula. Once we get through this, we'll have a question and answer session where folks can go up to the microphone. So I'm going to call up Miguel Meza now. As I'd mentioned earlier, he's my business partner in a company that we have called Isla Custom Coffees. So Miguel, you can introduce yourself and launch into this.
Okay. Aloha, everyone. So Joan and I have been working on this for about the last 3 weeks, gathering information from the various kau farmers in the Moaula area, and with a lot of help and input from growers like John Hassan, walking us through all the tasks and costs involved in developing a farm, and help from Andreas Stewart and Stuart Nakamoto from UHCTAR to develop a break-even scenario for current coffee farms situation and what it's likely to be in the future. The starting point to figure out what farms need to be profitable is to have some sense of how much coffee are people producing on their farms, and thus how much income is coming into those farms. And so we were able to gather data from 11 of the growers, some of them going back as far as 2004, and 3 farms were represented that for 2004 and 5, and 11 farms are representing 113 acres, or roughly a third of the Moaula area for the most recent years. And most of this information came from crop insurance reportings for each year. And so this is the average pounds of coffee cherry per acre going back to 2005. Our most recent few years, it's been reasonably high, 4,565 pounds of cherry per acre. Going back over the 10-year average, the average drops to about 4,063. And I mean, again, this is the average. There are certainly farmers that have averaged significantly lower than this, some being as low as 3,000 pounds an acre, and our very highest was at about 6,000 pounds an acre of the people that we were able to collect information from. Some things that you can see in the data there is that some very low years were explained by in 2009 when Holly Maumo started putting out a lot of gas. A lot of that coincided with flowering, especially in the pear tree area, which burned off a large number of the flowers that would have produced fruit. So for that year, the yields were down significantly. And the following 2 years after that, we had drought conditions, which also had produced rather low years. So I mean, certainly there are good years and there are bad years, and that is coffee, that is farming. The range of reported yields we saw for any one year ranged from 1,291 pounds per acre to a high of 9,744 pounds per acre. Now, I also want to point out that only 2 farms in one single year reported a yield of 8,000 pounds of cherry per acre or higher. And only 1 farm out of 11 reported an average yield of 6,000 pounds per acre or higher. So based with that as a starting point, we worked on a cost of production for kau coffee with a lot of help from John Hassan. We started using a lot of CTAR's recommendations for coffee growing in Kona and adapted that where necessary to the experience of growing coffee here. For example, mowing or using weed control more frequently because of more rain and more soil down here. We revised this several times with Stuart Nakamoto, who is the economist for UHCTAR. So our assumptions in this is that all labor is being done at minimum wage and is presumably being done by the grower as much as possible. And it's important to note that that minimum wage is going to be increasing steadily over the next 3 years. Right now, I believe it is $7.25, effective January 1st, 2016. It will be $8.50. And by January 2018, $10.10 per pound will be the new minimum wage. We are assuming fertilizing 4 times a year at using 360 pounds per acre of coffee super. The current price for that is $25 per 50-pound bag and an application time of 30 minutes an acre. Using Roundup 4 times per year, although many growers may be doing that actually more frequently at a current cost of $113 per acre. And then Bassiana, which is the fungus used to control CBB, being sprayed 1 time per month. And currently, the Bassiana spray through the SHAC program is very, very heavily subsidized. 50 to 70% of that cost is covered by the SHAC program. Those subsidies will end in the near future, however. And we're assuming right now the average cost over the harvest season being 70 cents per pound, and that will likely increase with an increased minimum wage to close to 90 cents a pound and perhaps higher in the near future. For all of our scenarios, we made a lot of assumptions about a farm. In Kau, in the Moaula area, the average farm size is around 10 acres. Some people may have as little as 4, and some, I think, the largest might be 25, but for the most part, around 10 acres is the average size, so that's what we used to model this out. And we took our 10-year average yield per acre of 4,063 pounds of coffee cherry. We're assuming that this farm is 10 acres planted at 5 by 12 density, or a little over 700 coffee trees per acre. And that this farm is selling all of its coffee at the parchment stage, which is primarily how Kau coffee growers do sell their coffee, is at parchment, which is after you have pulped the cherry and removed the fruit in a semi-processed stage. And that the parchment price is $11 a pound, which has been more or less the average for the last 18 to 24 months that Kau farmers have been receiving for their parchment. We're also assuming that this farmer has invested in a tractor and a sprayer to manage the fertilizer and the Bassiana themselves, which would be, in the long term, a cheaper scenario than hiring somebody who had that equipment to come in and do that work for them. And it's also important to notice that looking at this break-even looks at total profitability of the farm. So this is not a single year's cash flow. This is not a single year's profits. This is assuming all the overhead costs and establishment costs to run that farm and to see if this as a business actually makes a profit. So if that number of break-even is 0, then that means the farmer has been compensated for all the investments they have made into that farm and has made minimum wage for the labor inputs that they have put in. So a number of 0 would be really the minimum and that a farmer would want to see, and it is a decent number. So first we need to know what has Kau coffee looked like, and that certainly changes from the past to now. Before CBB, as I'm sure the Kona farmers are very well aware, making a decent living on coffee seems plausible and reasonably easy. Before coffee berry borer, it would have taken about 3,246 pounds of coffee cherry per acre to hit a break-even scenario, which almost all of the farmers would have been accomplishing. Now, this is assuming that the market price was $11 per pound. As long as the price stayed above about $9.50 per pound, then those farms should have been profitable. And for the last 2 to 3 years, I would say that has probably been true in Kau. Before CBB, you would have seen a recovery from coffee cherry. How many pounds of coffee cherry it takes to get to 1 pound of parchment would be 4 to 1. It would take 4 pounds of coffee cherry to equal 1 pound of parchment coffee. And there would have been no cost from spraying Bassiana, from setting traps and doing field surveys of coffee berry borer in your fields, which cumulatively on a 10-acre farm is greater than $12,000 an additional cost that farmers incur now that they did not 2 or 3 years ago. And again, most coffee farms, as long as they're producing over 3,246 pounds per acre at the current market price, were likely profitable before coffee berry borer. And that's really what is our biggest challenge today. We started developing this really to see what would be the impact of increased rental rates on the farmers, and certainly that will have an impact on their profitability. But what we really found is the greatest challenge to the Kau growers right now economically is the impact of CBB, which is a little bit delayed from Kona, who has been dealing with it severely for about 5 years now. But infection rates just in the last 12 months have started to climb significantly, and if that is not remedied, then the numbers we will see ahead are very, very frightening. So CBB arrived in Moaula in 2011, and for the first couple of years, the counts were very, very low. Most farms were probably seeing less than 5%, many less than 1%. But unfortunately, Kau is a little bit different than Kona, and there's been a lot of research been done in Kona as far as the best pest management strategy for the coffee berry borer. But we have a much longer growing season, which makes it much more difficult to control compared to Kona or for timing sprays of Bassiana. It's a much wetter area, which makes it just from a logistical standpoint more difficult to manage. But luckily, IPM is being worked on currently with Luis Aristobal, who Joan had mentioned earlier, who has spent about a month here, I believe, working with the coffee growers and seeing what is a better way to control CBB here, which would be different from how it would be controlled in Kona. They recently just completed field surveys for CBB infection. The lowest that was discovered was 10%, and the highest was 80% in a more or less abandoned field. And they were certainly everywhere in between that. One thing that was definitely found is that farms who had less neighbors around them or no neighbors had lower infection rates, and those that had many neighbors, especially with abandoned fields, tended to have higher infection rates, which I'm sure mirrors the experience of most growers in Kona. But it is also important to note that we are at the beginning of the harvest season. Because we have a harvest season that doesn't really end, it continues for 8 to 9 months on any one farm, that we can't do a stripping as effectively as they do in Kona. So at the beginning of the season, we're going to have fairly high infection rates. So hopefully these will go down in the next 2 or 3 months, but we won't really know yet. So the next scenarios, we're going to look at 10 to 15% CBB infection rate, which is what we would say is average optimistic scenario for growers this season. And we're also assuming that the current rental rate of 150 years per acre starting now, but in other scenarios in the future, assuming $600 per acre as proposed by RLH. So currently, at the current lease per acre rate of $150 per acre per year and 10 to 15% CBB infection, it would now take 4,686 pounds of coffee cherry per acre to break even, which is slightly higher than the rolling average for 10 years. Last year was a very, very good year harvest-wise, and so I think we had a little over 5,500 pounds per acre as an average, which coincided with all-time market price highs. So if we saw similar yields and similar prices this year, then most farmers would probably be okay. But if it's like the previous 2 or 3 years, there would certainly be some farmers that would be below profitability. We're also taking into account that January, the minimum wage will go up to $8.50 per hour. And as the CBB infection goes up, the recovery rate from cherry to parchment gets worse and worse. So at just 10 to 15%, it now takes 4.8 pounds of coffee cherry to equal 1 pound of parchment, whereas before it would have only taken 4 pounds. And currently in this season, CBB management is being subsidized by the SHAC program, which will cover 50 to 75% of the spray that is used to manage CBB in the fields. I cannot remember off the top of my head what that is. Okay, $220 per gallon is the cost of Bassiana spray, which is very, very expensive. One thing we noticed looking at the numbers is that quickly a pest we did not have before becomes the #1 cost in operating a coffee farm. You spend more money on spray and on managing CBB than you do on fertilizing. And this did not exist in any significant sense 3 years ago for Kau farmers. And then again, looking at the average of 4,063 pounds per acre, farmers would not be profitable at that level unless they're receiving a price of $12 per pound parchment, or their yields were significantly higher. So let's assume all these same assumptions and that the rental rate or the lease rate goes from $150 up to $600 per acre. And I believe this is also taking into account that within a couple of years from now that our minimum wage is now up to $10.10 per pound. So we're going from 3 years ago, it took a little over 3,000 pounds per acre to be profitable, to now taking 5,563 pounds per acre for farms to remain profitable, which would be a higher average yield than 95% of the farms we sampled. Only one farm that we had talked to would be profitable in this scenario. We're assuming at this point the average cost of harvesting has increased to 90 cents per pound from 70 cents a pound because of the increased minimum wage. Still assuming 4.8 to 1 recovery ratio from cherry to parchment. And that the subsidies for Bassiana spray have gone away, which is going to bear the full brunt of these expenses on the farmers, both in Kau and in Kona at this point. And it's important to note that number doesn't sound like a lot, but that is 37% higher than the 10-year average of 4,063 pounds per acre. And that even if farmers hit this level, coffee is still very, very price sensitive. We are at all-time market highs right now as far as prices, and even a 10% reduction in that price to say $10 a pound parchment or so, it would require 6,500 pounds per acre to remain profitable, which is higher than any single farm we talk to. And that is 60% higher than the current average yields. Now we look at 30% CBB, and unfortunately this is a level that some farms are currently experiencing and or exceeding. You get to this scenario and profitability is impossible. It is absolutely impossible. It would take 30,000 pounds of cherry per acre, assuming you could get $11 a pound, which you wouldn't, to be profitable in this scenario. So it is simply not possible, and which is why this has to be addressed very, very quickly and drastically. The other thing that happens is that your recovery ratio goes, now it's 8 to 1. Now it takes 2 times as many cherries to get the same number of sellable parchment. And also that sellable parchment is still going to have some infections in it, some holes, and that's going to result in a discounted price from buyers of that parchment. You're not going to likely get the full $11 a pound. You might get a discount of 25 or 50% of that price, further increasing those farms' losses. And I mean, again, many farms are at this level at the beginning of the season.
So Miguel has basically painted a picture that you can see, whether you're at a rental rate of $150 a year or $600 per acre per year, you got some serious problems. I mean, and this is kind of what we meant earlier when we said we were really grateful that we were prompted by RLH to look at this, because we're finding this problem now and can think of lots of ways to really address this. But what this diagram here shows is basically how berry borer travels. So as folks who have traveled up to Moaula know, our farms are right next to each other. So they're very close, up in Cloud Rest and over in Pear Tree. So all the rectangles on here are pretty much farms. Now, the one that is pink is an abandoned field, and the ones that are green are ones that are still in production. So basically, this is how Luis Aristizabal explained it to me in terms of how they expand. And he had this piece of paper, he kept drawing these bigger and bigger circles. So the smallest circle in the middle is your hot spot. That's where you have a high concentration of CBB. If you don't take care of that concentration, it basically creates all sorts of babies. And then the babies obviously need to eat. So the circles, the bigger and bigger circles basically mean the increasing population spreading bigger and bigger areas to go find food. So as you can see, they don't respect boundaries of farms, right? So this is a scenario that folks who are close to abandoned fields are facing. Great. So the point that I wanted to bring up here is with drastic rental rate increase, because right now we're at $150 per acre per year. And we use the 600 number because that was the minimum rental rate that was initially proposed to us by RLH. And like I said, it is very important for everyone to remember this is not a finalized rate. They have said that they want to negotiate all the terms in good faith with us. So don't get too hung up on the number itself. The point is that if you have a dramatic increase in your rental rate from one year to the next, and everybody is paid up to stay on their farms through April 30th of 2016, so we're all wondering what is the rental rate going to be and how many farmers will want to continue. So as a farmer, when you sit here and you look at this situation, you start thinking about, where am I situated in Moaula? How many farms around me are going to stop farming as of April 30th, 2016? They're going to give up their lands. Hopefully the new landowner has a plan for the abandoned fields that will result. And if there is no plan, then you get a situation like this, compounded. So then you're thinking as a farmer, okay, if I can afford the rental rate increase, it's not just the rental rate increase I'm worried about. I'm thinking, how much is CBB going to affect me over the next 15 years of the term of this license? Because the rental rate increase, whatever it's going to be, is not going to be as high as what you're going to pay to manage CBB, especially if you have a lot of farms around you that are not taken care of. Now, one of the things that has been proposed to us is that existing farmers would take over some of these fields that would be vacated, which sounds like a great idea, except for the fact that if a farm has been abandoned and it has fallen into disrepair, there are some pretty significant costs in rehabilitating that field before you would start to get product again that you could sell. And so we had figured out, Miguel, with Jonathan's help, that for a 10-acre field, it would cost, what, $80,000? Yeah, $80,000 for 2 years with no income coming in from that farm for rehabilitation costs. Next spring, you'll have a group of farmers who will say, I want to stop farming, I don't want to pay these higher rental rates, and then they go. And then the rest of the people who stay, if the berry borer is not addressed properly, you're just going to have more and more and more farmers drop out over the course of the 15 years because they will not be able to handle this. And then everything that we worked so hard to build, may end up literally destroyed by an insect.